Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Recently, QIDI Tech sent me their X Plus 3 3D printer to test out and review, so I'm going to be making a couple of videos covering that. This first video is going to be the initial setup and some of my initial thoughts. I'm going to go through actually taking the printer out of the box, setting it up, kicking off the first print, upgrading the firmware, downloading and installing their slicer, slicing some prints with the default settings, sending it over to Clipper using both their interface and the web browser. They kind of hide the web browser component a little bit, just using a different port. I think they want you to use their slicer because it has some nice built-in integrations. I like to use both, so I'm going to show you how to use both as well. So to get started, I'm going to show you some of the test prints that I did here first, and then we'll go ahead and walk through the unboxing and the initial setup, and then we'll jump over to upgrading the firmware and then going into the slicer component. If you have any questions about what I covered or would like to see any other videos, go to leave a comment below or join us on Discord. Alright guys, so here are some of the test prints I did just to see how it works. This one right here was one of the ones that they had pre-sliced. This was the first print before I downloaded the QIDI slicer and set all of that up. Then headphone holder, business card holder, a little spiral vase. All of this was straight off of the build plate. I didn't do any cleanup. You can see there's very little stringing. Bridge test, overall it did pretty good. There's still some tweaking I could do to get the bottom one a little bit better, but for just slicing it with default settings, I think that was good. A hollowed out pyramid, obviously our calibration cube. It turned out pretty good overall. There's a little bit of ghosting, so I might have to play with the settings a little bit to adjust that. Just another type of calibration cube here, and then another test here that does a bunch of different things. There is some stringing like right through here, but overall I think it turned out pretty well. I mean, some stringing is expected, especially when it's not tuned, but like I said, this was all just using default slicer settings and clicking print and letting it go. So I'm happy with it overall, especially with things like this. I mean, this is very difficult to do, especially like on an Ender 3 if you don't have it calibrated properly. Because these are so small that if you hit it, it can lose adhesion or just have other issues. Alright guys, before we go ahead and start unboxing the printer, I wanted to go over a couple key features. Figured I would use the site here as reference to talk to them. The first one is the printing speed. It says up to 600 millimeters a second. Most filaments won't be able to get to that. I think if you use some of theirs, you can get close. I'm not entirely sure. Support was saying around 300 is pretty good with most of their filaments. If you start to use some of the cheaper ones, you're probably below 200. It just really depends. But I think the hardware of the printer can support it. I don't think the filaments can, but it's still a very fast printer. The next one here is the temperature controlled chamber, which is a nice feature for filaments that need it. You can control the temperature and really the environment as well, so you won't have wind or gusts of air or anything blowing into it that can potentially mess it up. This is really only relevant to filaments that need it. So if you're just printing PLA, you actually have to have the top off and the door open. It still blocks most of the airflow and stuff that could potentially mess with it, so it does help. But this is a huge help for the filaments that need that extra control. The next one here is the 0.1 millimeter printing accuracy. I have noticed that the prints are pretty good, but I've really only been printing with 0.2 millimeter, and that's been good enough for me for most cases. The next one here is talking about the high flow extruder, which is actually really nice. You can get a lot of throughput, which contributes to the ability to hit that 600 millimeter a second print speed. But it's also worth pointing out here that it does come with two hot ends. You've got the one with the copper hot end by default, and then you have the one with the hardened steel, which is going to be used for the more abrasive filaments. And then lastly, this one kind of goes over several things, but it is Clipper based, and it does have the fluid web interface, so I'll be covering that in the video. It is pretty nice, especially if you like Clipper. They have everything already configured by default, so you don't really have to mess around with it. It's got we already talked about the high-speed extruder. It's got 6x6 automatic bed leveling using a laser. It also comes with a leveling sheet, so you're not guessing around at different thicknesses. You use the one that they provide to set that offset, which is great, assuming you don't lose it. And then it has a filament runout sensor, which is located in the back. and then the flexible HF board, which is really nice. It just pops out. You can bend it, get the print off, and put it back in place. I do like that they put little plastic stoppers at the back, so you kind of just slide the plate in to hit that stopper and then set it down so it's in the right place consistently every time. All right, so let's go ahead and jump over to the unboxing. Alright guys, so here's the box the X Plus 3 comes in. It is quite large. If you have to move it upstairs or downstairs, you might need a little bit of help. I think it weighs about 70 pounds based on what the shipping label said. So it is well packaged. You can see it has the corner pieces and everything so the box doesn't get damaged. But it is large, it is heavy, just because they have it already pre-assembled. They advertise that it'll only take about 10 minutes from unboxing to your first print. So I am going to kind of test it out a little bit, see how easy it is to actually get started. And then I'm going to drill into some of the basics using their slicer and then kick off a couple test runs to give you my initial feedback. And then I'm going to do more in-depth videos once I have more hands-on time with the printer itself, giving you a more thorough review after using it more. I want to get this initial one out just to let you guys see what it looks like and see how it works just out of the box. But I do want to do a more in-depth review as well. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up the top of the box. One good thing just off the bat is the instruction manual and the USB card is up top. So I'm going to go ahead and set those off to the side and then try to pull this printer out. Alright guys, so I got everything out of the box and I just have it setting, not really together here, but as it was. As you can see here, it is a larger printer. It has a build volume of 280 by 280 by 270. So it's a bit larger than like your Ender 3 series type printer, and it's fully enclosed. So over here we have the instruction manual, a special paper that they use for leveling. So you're going to want to make sure you don't lose that. The USB card or stick, the dry box, and then some filament over there for testing, and all of the accessory kit. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go and take a look at the user guide and go ahead and get started following through that, because there is some stuff in here that you have to unclip before you can actually get going. Alright, so I did want to show you the user guide really quick. It shows you step by step how to actually take it out of the box, how to remove each piece or each box, because they are kind of stored inside the printer as well, just to reduce the overall box needed for shipping. And it shows you what to remove. So we've got to cut these zip ties and stuff in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, just following the instructions. So we got this one right there, right there. We'll go on to the next page. There's a couple on the bottom. So the zip ties we need to remove from the top are right over here, these two, to get this box out for the hot end, and over here, here, and right over there. So now that the top zip ties are off, now we have to remove the 4 ties that are securing the platform. So we've got 2 on each side. These ones are a bit more heavy duty, so make sure you're not using like cheap scissors or they might break. Alright, now that those zip ties are cut, I'm going to go ahead and power on the printer and follow the on-screen instructions. Alright, I'm trying to get as close as I can to the screen so you can see everything I'm doing. But select your language and then hit next, so English, next. If you went ahead and powered this on first, it's actually walking you through all of the unboxing. So it gives you a guided setup process through the user interface, which is cool. So I can hit next there. It's telling you to remove the zip ties we just removed. And to remove these zip ties, which we just cut those. I couldn't actually remove them from the base because they're kind of secured there. So I'm hoping once I raise the axis, they'll slide out easier. And remove the 4 screws on the hot end, so they're going to be right there, 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 and there. So go ahead and remove those really quick. Okay, now that I got those screws removed, I'm going to go and hit next. And then it's going to tell you to take the packaging out from the bottom here, which I'll zoom out a tad bit to show you. Then it will also let me get those zip ties that I couldn't get out. So if you see here, it's moving up the axis, and there's a pad down here at the bottom, which is telling us to take out. And then if you couldn't get these zip ties out, now you can get to them. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and hit next again. And now it's telling me to preheat the bed before leveling, so just go ahead and do that. And just hit the button here so it starts heating up. And then wait for it to actually get up to temperature before moving on. Okay, now that it's up to temperature, go ahead and hit next. Just make sure that the platform is clear. Hit next. basically homing the printer now. Alright, so now we have to set the Z offset. It comes with this special leveling card here. You want to make sure you don't lose it. You're supposed to adjust the offset until you feel a slight friction when moving this card. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. I'm going to change the camera angle so you can see what's going on as well. Alright, so here you can see the card, and it is sliding under with ease. So now I need to adjust this down. Okay, so I'm at a point here where I have a slight friction. It's touching, it's rubbing it slightly, but it's still sliding. So I think we're good there. I will make a note that that took more adjustments than I thought it would. I was moving too slow to begin with. So if you have a big gap to begin with, adjust the layer height, which you can see here. It was at 0.05 first, I switched it to 0.1. Now it's going to go through and do the leveling. Now it's saying leveling is complete, so let's just hit complete. Now it's running the input shaper. Alright guys, one thing I did want to point out really quick which happened to me is don't turn off the printer during the initial walkthrough. Make sure you have enough time to actually go through the guided setup. If you do end up having to turn it off, make sure when you turn it back on, you hit skip. You'll have to go through the stuff manually, not through the guided setup. But if you don't hit skip and the position of the Z axis changed, you're going to end up grinding it against the nozzle and have to go through recalibrating it anyways. So that happened to me. Alright, the next step is we got to go ahead and put the filament spool on the back and load some filament. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. Alright guys, so this is the back of the printer. We are going to want to connect the spool for the filament. This kind of just slides in place like this, and then it goes down. And then we'll open this up so we can actually put the spool on. Now let's go ahead and grab the dry box. Alright, so we have to assemble the dry box. First thing we have to do, which gives you the instructions here, is pop this piece out. And I recommend saving it so that you don't throw it in there. Push down on both sides, and then you kind of pull this piece out. So then I'm going to store this. And then also if you look at the back of the box, it kind of goes over everything here as well. I moved the box over to the side so we can work on it a bit easier, and I turned off the printer so you can hear me. Alright, so now we got to open this up and put the silica gel in here. It does have an area where you can kind of tear it. You can see that right here. So we got a big silica gel packet. This just goes in here. Make sure it's all the way in so it doesn't hit the filament. Now that that's in place, we're going to put the filament in. The package should come with these two spacers. I'm using the filament they provided, so I'm going to put the spacer at the bottom and then one at the top. It just helps align everything a bit better in there. If you're using a bigger spool, you don't have to worry about it. So we're just going to slide the filament through here. Set that in place now. And then we're going to put the top piece on as well. And then we'll put the cover back on. And then now we can go and put this on the back of the printer. Okay, here you're going to want to put it at about a 40-degree angle based on what it says here. What you're looking for is these two grooves to line up here and this flat part to be on the bottom. So when it lines up, you can push it in further like that, and then we'll get the lid, go ahead and just put that on and then turn it. Now that that's locked in place, we can use the piece of tubing they provided in the accessory package and connect it here at the bottom of the reel, and then feed the filament through. I'm not going to connect it over here yet. I'm going to wait till I have everything fed through, and then once everything is connected and you're actually grabbing the filament at the extruder, then you can connect this over here. So I'm just going to feed this through. I'll go ahead and connect it at the bottom, just pushes right in, and then pull this filament out and then feed it through here till we get to the hot end. Then we'll go to the front of the printer and I'll show you how to go to preheat and purge everything. Now that the filament's pushed through, we just want to go down, go to our settings, go to load, preheat our hot end here, set it to, I don't know, 200, and then let that heat up. Once you're up to temperature, go ahead and select like 20 millimeters, the down arrow, and that should purge out about 20 millimeters of filament. I would do that a couple times to make sure that it is all the way seated. And then once you're good there, you can go ahead and connect the tubing on the back. If it's not feeding anything through, you're going to want to go ahead and push the filament further through until it catches on the extruder. Right, next, let's jump over to network, and we want to go ahead and connect to the Wi-Fi. So if you haven't already, just go ahead and select your network, and then it's going to ask for the credentials. You put the credentials in, and then it'll give you an IP address back. Remember that IP address because you're going to need to enter it in the slicer. Okay, now that that's all done, we can go ahead and kick off a test print, and I'm just going to go ahead and kick off one of the test prints that I already had on the SD card. So I went ahead and changed my camera angle here so you can see the screen and below. Not the best time-lapse option, but I already have this camera set up. It'll work. You'll be able to see what's going on underneath. So it's just preheating now, then it's going to kick off. That print is done. You can go ahead and take it off the build plate. This is just magnetic, so you just pop it up and then you can kind of peel it off. It's still hot, so it might take a minute to cool down. So here's the print. Overall, it looks pretty good. A tad bit of stringing at the top. Bottom looks pretty smooth, so I might have to do a little bit of fine tuning. But that was just quick print with the filament they provided and the test file they provided. So obviously there's a lot that can still be done, but overall getting started was quite easy, so I'm pretty pleased. Alright guys, now that we kicked off our first test print, I wanted to just go over a couple things that came in the box as accessories. You got some miscellaneous tools here for, I'm assuming, cleaning your nozzle, getting the nozzle off, extra fuse. It came with some glue here, which I haven't had to use yet. Adhesion's not been an issue at all. A screwdriver, the hardened steel nozzle hot end here. So right now what's in there is the copper one. They give you a separate one, which is the hardened steel, which you can use with your more abrasive filaments, which it's nice that it came with both with separate hot ends. It makes it easier to swap things out. Some Allen wrenches. There's some more over here in a nice little wrapper. A putty knife to get anything off the bed if there's any issues, a network cable if you need it, and then here are actually some rubber feet. I think I'm going to put these on. It doesn't say anything about them in the instructions. They add it as optional. It's definitely not needed, but it's going to help damper some of the vibrations from when the printer is moving. When this thing is getting up to speed, it's shaking this desk here actually quite a bit. So I'm thinking about putting these on, see if it makes a difference. Alright guys, so to go ahead and update the firmware, the process is really easy. We just go to the software and firmware section, which I'll link to below. We select our printer. So I've got the X Plus 3, and then we go ahead and download that. So just go over to where it says download. Go ahead and grab the latest, which is this 425, and just hit download. And go ahead and save it. And then I got my downloads folder here. We'll go ahead and extract what we just downloaded. And we'll take this, we gotta extract it again. and then this QD update folder. We're going to put this on our SD card, just like that. And then it also says to rename the drive. So if you have a name of the drive, go ahead and just remove it so that it's blank. I'm assuming it will throw an error if the name is not blank. So they call that out explicitly in the documentation. So it could take a second here to update. But if you look at their, that's the video. If you look at their guide here, so it says here, go ahead and extract, get the QD update folder, put this on your USB drive, and rename it with space or just no name on the keyboard. So it should have like a space here. I left it with no name. It read it just fine. This is specifically saying a space. Like I said, I left mine with no name and it worked okay. I think it's just wanting no characters at all there. And then from there, we'll plug it into the printer, and then I'll show you the rest on the screen. So once we got the USB drive plugged in, we need to go to the About page. So just go down here, go over to About, and it should say Update Files Detected, and then Updating, so we go ahead and hit that. Now just keep in mind, when you do this, you are going to have to go through and recalibrate the printer. So the first time through for me was just an initial setup, make sure everything was working right from the factory. Now I'm going to go ahead and update it, make sure that we're on the latest firmware, and then do the recalibration again. Alright, so once it's done, it's going to give you the screen. So we'll go ahead and power off the printer for 20 seconds and power back on. Okay, now we're powering it on. We should be able to go into the menu, confirm that we're on the new version of the firmware. And it's actually going through and updating everything here now on the screen. And it looks like this is going to take a couple minutes, so I'm going to turn off the camera for the rest of it. Alright, once it's finished updating, and I will note that it did take probably a solid half hour, it's going to say update finished, just hit confirm. And if we go back to About, we should see that we're on the latest firmware. Now let's go ahead and run our calibration again, so we want to go ahead and do calibration, auto bed leveling, go ahead and preheat, and it's going to be the same process as before, so I'm not going to do all of it on camera. But I'm just going to go ahead and reset the Z offset, let it run its mesh, and then let it do the sharper calibrations. Alright guys, now that we got the firmware updated and we kicked off a test print on the USB drive that was provided, let's go ahead and download the QD slicer. I'm going to show you how to set that up. And then I'm going to talk to a couple things as we're going, some of the things I noticed about the slicer, show you how to set it up for a non-network printer and a network printer. I like the integration that it has with Clipper, which allows you to send the G-code file directly over and start the print all in the same interface. I do wish I made Clipper or the Fluid dashboard a little bit easier to access outside of the app. I will show you how to get to that as well though. You just have to specify the port. Alright, so we're back to the software and firmware page. Let's go ahead and grab the slicer. Now there are two slicers here. We got the print slicer and then the standard slicer. I'm not really sure what the difference is as far as what they provide, except for the standard one here is the one that is called out for the X+3 or their latest generation one. So this is the one we want. So we're just going to go here and go to download. And then let's grab the latest one. I did notice some differences as far as speed on slicing going from like the 1.0.2, which was on my USB drive, going to the 104, which is why I'm showing you to grab it from here to get the latest versus just downloading it from the USB drive. Alright, so go ahead and save that and then extract it and go ahead and kick off this install. So here's the file. We'll just go ahead and extract all. And then just launch this. I uninstalled the slicer so that I can show you a clean setup. I'm hoping it didn't cache any of the settings, but if it did, I'll point them out. Alright, just go ahead and select your language, hit next, and then accept the license agreement. You can view it, or you can do a quick install or a custom install. The quick installation is just fine, so that's what I did. And then run now. Alright, so it did save some of my settings, so let me just go ahead and delete those really quick. So devices, I'm going to just delete both printers to set it up like it's new. The first time it launches, you should be presented with this screen. I'll just go ahead and hit next. Select your printer. Like I said, I've got the X+3, so hit next. Then you can define a custom printer profile, but I did not. This is for offline mode. If you're going to be using it online or tying it in with Clipper, I'll show you that next, but just go ahead and hit next here. Just select the default filaments. That's the ones I had selected were fine for me. You can always go back in and modify those later if needed. Check for updates. So that's next. I just go ahead and hit next here. If you want all of your STL files and stuff to automatically go to this slicer, you would associate it with this, like STL to the QIDI slicer. I also use Cura quite a bit, so I'm not going to do that. So just go ahead and hit next, and then you can change your mode here. Simple's selected by default. Then you can actually change it over here, Simple, Advanced, Expert, so it's easy to change. So just go ahead and hit next. And then you can switch this to use inches instead of millimeters if you want. Okay, so here, like I said, this would be assuming you have a offline printer. You're not going to be able to actually connect to the device from here. It's going to show you how to actually set up a printer for online usage, which we'll do here in a second. So if you're just wanting to slice something, put it on a USB stick and take it over to the printer, this is what you need to do. And you can go ahead and skip this next section. For those of you who want to use Fluid or the Clipper UI, go ahead and follow these steps. I highly recommend it. It's the easiest route to go. It makes printing much easier. But just go over to printer settings, go to add a physical printer, go ahead and give it a name. So just X+3 or whatever you want to call it. Now you have to enter your IP address of the printer. So when we connected earlier to the Wi-Fi, I showed you where to get the IP address. You want to enter that and then hit test. So this is going to connect to Clipper using the Moonraker API, and then when you're actually connected to it, it's going to use the Fluid interface. So just hit test. Alright, so you can see here everything works correctly. So we got a success. And go ahead and hit OK. Now you have the system presets and the physical printers. So you want to make sure you have your physical printer selected. Then if you go over to devices, if it doesn't load, just go ahead and restart the slicer. So I'm going to exit and then launch it again. Now if we go over to device, we now have our Fluid interface. I want to point out here that the camera is not enabled by default. Was hoping it would have a camera built in. I actually reached out to after sales support. They said they're working on it. They set everything up. So if you look in the configuration, they have the webcam configuration and everything there. So if you just plug in a USB camera, it will work. You have to enable it down in settings. So if you go to settings, cameras, this is going to be disabled by default. You just go ahead and enable it, and that will put it on the dashboard so you can see it. After sales support told me they're hoping to have some sort of option in about a month or so that will work inside the chamber. The issue they're having is when they actually close off the chamber and have it preheated, a lot of the cameras start to have issues when they get up to that temperature, is what they're saying, which I can see that being the case. But if we go back to our main dashboard here, we'll see everything that we would expect, and everything is already set up and ready to go, which is nice. You don't have to mess around with any of the printer settings or anything like that because they already did that for you. So this is the integration directly in the slicer. If you want to view it from a web browser or like your phone, which I've had to do a couple times when I was checking the status of a print, if you go to your IP address, :10088, it'll bring up the Fluid interface for Clipper. I used this to check the status of a print a couple times from my phone when I wasn't around my computer. Just little tip, it's not necessary, you don't have to do this, but if you're around the house and not by your computer and you want it to check, that's going to be the easiest way to do that. Then if you go into history, you can see all of your recent prints. You can kick those off again, it saves those in here, which is nice until you run out of storage, but that's not going to happen anytime soon with these small files. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back over to the slicer. Let's talk about a couple things here. First, I typically leave the advanced settings. I don't leave simple. It only adds a couple more settings, not much. A couple things to point out here are your supports. infill and brim. If you want quick access to those, that's here. They have more settings in here for those. One thing I wanted to show you around supports, if you wanted to use a tree support and it's enabled, you would switch it from grid to organic. So that will create a tree support, and I typically leave that setting selected because I don't like normal supports. I prefer the tree supports. They're just easier to get off. Overall, the slicer works good. There's one other thing I wanted to show you in here, which is related to speed. They have the speed kind of capped out at 300 millimeters. It's going to be based on your filament you're using. I know that they're advertising up to 600 millimeters a second. I don't see how you can get that unless you're using very specific filament. The hardware is awesome. It's all lightweight, good quality. So from the hardware standpoint, I can see it actually being able to achieve those speeds. But the limitation is going to be the filament. If you're using cheap filament, you're probably going to be under 200 millimeters a second. When you start getting up into Hatchbox or some of their filaments, you'll be able to achieve these speeds, which is, they're good speeds. They're just not 600. All right, so let's talk about the slicer here for a second. So it's pretty similar to Cura in a way where you have your plate, the settings on the right, and then a lot of these settings here for sizing. I did notice some odd things like here. Let me just pull this in real quick. So to pull it in, you would just do the same thing you did with Cura, or you just drag it over and drop it in, or you just go to open and select the file. One weird thing that kind of threw me for a loop when I was doing the testing was scale. So right now, this is at 100% scale, right? If I drag this, it says it's 235% scale. Now, if I go back over and go back into this, it says it's at 100% scale again. So I don't know what my actual scale is if I'm trying to reproduce it by just using this drag feature. I point this out because it does have your scale factors over here. So if I switch this back to 100, it'll go back to the original size. So really, I guess what I'm saying is go ahead and just use these features or these controls over here and don't try to drag the size because you're not going to get anywhere near what you're looking for. They have everything over here though. And then if you're in expert mode, it's also going to show you the physical size and an estimate on like if there's any errors or anything, or what it can auto repair. But let's go ahead and slice this really quick. So up here, it gives you a breakdown of each of the components, the total time for the print. This is with the tree supports you can see here, because it's set to everywhere. Actually, for this print, when I printed it, I did no supports and just did a brim, but it's fine for this example. But it shows you all of the different breakdowns of what it's doing and what the fill is, how long it takes total, which has been pretty accurate. And then if you look over here, regardless of which mode you have active, it gives you the slice information, so amount of filament used, estimated print time, etc. And then this is going by the default printer settings. So this is at a 2mm resolution or layer height. You can go up to 16 or 12 or create your own, which I'll go into that in more detail in the next video I do, where I've had more time to be hands-on with the slicer and the actual printer itself. But here, this is what I like with the integration. So if you can export G-code, save it to file, whatever, go put it in the printer, or you just go right here, send to printer. Now you can just do upload or upload and print. If you upload and print, it's going to send it over and automatically start preheating that bed. If you just do upload, which I'm going to do now, pushes it to the printer. So if you go over to devices and then go under jobs here, you'll see what we just uploaded. And then you can just click on that, hit print or preheat for the print, or you can even do the preview G-code, which generates that preview I've showed before in different videos. But if you're in here, just scroll down, and then you can see the preview here. It goes based on each layer. It's going to build it up. But overall, I feel that integration in the slicer is really nice. But there are times where I have had to connect to it outside of the slicer, so knowing what port to use to connect does help as well. But talking about this slicer specifically, I know this is a version 1, so pretty much like the first release of it. Overall, it works. There are some little quirks. You just have to get used to it. You got to get used to the layout, which is kind of the same with any slicer. But I haven't had any breaking issues with it. I just know that there are little quirks here or there that I would expect they'll fix over time, just to make things a little bit more user friendly. Some of the settings are just, I mean, they're here, but they're hidden if you don't know exactly what they are. So it could be almost overwhelming if you're not used to working with slicers or have no idea what you're looking at. But if you're just looking to slice and print, I mean, the reality of it is you don't have to go in there. You just drag your file on here, go in and make sure your size is right, your infill's right, and whatever supports you want to use, and then just go in and send it to your printer. Alright guys, so that covered everything you need to know to get started with this printer. Overall, like I mentioned throughout the video, I think this printer is a really good bargain for the price. You get a lot of great hardware. If you're in the market for a cheap 3D printer, this isn't necessarily your printer you're going to want to look at. This I would say is more of a mid-priced, so it's going to be comparable to some of the higher end Creality or going into the Prusa line. But it's a lot more stable and reliable than your $1 or $2 or even $300 printers. Overall, I gotta say I do like the printer. I am going to be doing a more in-depth review once I've had a little bit more time with it. I've only been using it for about a week and a half, so I wanted to get something out kind of showing you my initial thoughts. But I will be doing more videos on this, some of the things I learned along the way, and a more in-depth review.